Welcome to Brain in a Vat. We are joined by Alastair Norcross today from the University of Colorado Boulder. Alastair, would you like to start with a thought experiment?
I'd like you to imagine, just for a minute, that you are the operator of a drone up in the sky, which is armed with an air-to-surface missile. And here's the situation. The security forces in this particular country, let's say Afghanistan, have been tracking a terrorist who is planning to detonate a bomb, a suicide bomb, in a crowded market, which would kill anything from, let's say, 200, 300, 400 people. Luckily, you know exactly where this terrorist is. You have the particular house pinpointed, and from your surveillance, you can tell that in the house, you have the terrorist who is preparing the suicide vest and 2 or 3 accomplices, and that's it. As far as you know, there are no innocent people inside the house. So your plan is to launch the missile at the house, destroying the house, killing the terrorist, preventing the attack. But at the last minute, before you launch the missile, your surveillance colleagues on the ground tell you that there is a child fruit vendor who has set up a stall right outside the house, just on the other side of the wall, who would certainly be killed if the missile were to strike the house. And efforts to get the child to move have been unsuccessful. The terrorist is about to leave the house and walk to the market and detonate the bomb. So you're faced with this choice. You can go ahead with the plan, which would destroy the house, would kill the terrorist, but would also kill an innocent victim, a child. Or you could refrain from doing that with the almost certain conclusion that the terrorist would detonate the bomb in a crowded market, killing hundreds of other innocent people. There's the choice, and obviously it's a choice that no one wants to be faced with. Now, I mean, this is a fictional case, but it's the kind of thing which does actually occur in war zones, especially with the kind of technology that we now have. So what kinds of considerations should you weigh in this situation? The moral theory that I favor, known as utilitarianism, focuses its evaluation of actions on the consequences of the actions. Basically, you simply ask yourself, well, it's not simple, but you ask yourself, what will happen if I do this? What will happen if I do that? What will happen if I do this other thing? So from the options that confront you, you try to evaluate the consequences. And of course, what this theory says is that the moral considerations entirely affected by the value of the different consequences. Now, by value, I mean just basically, how good or bad is it if this thing happens versus that thing happens? So part of this theory has to be, some kind of account of what makes consequences good or bad. And the account that I favor, the account which is associated with this theory, utilitarianism, which goes back at least as far as the English philosophers, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, is that what makes consequences good or bad is how well or badly people and other sentient creatures do in those outcomes. So how much happiness there is, how much, that's the good side, of course, how much suffering there is, that's the bad side. And most utilitarians like myself believe that human beings are not the only creatures who can experience happiness or can suffer. In fact, most, if not all, of the animals that we come into contact with, either directly or indirectly, are capable of good states of well-being, happiness, pleasure, that kind of thing, or, unfortunately, very bad ones, pain, suffering, that kind of thing. So in the example that I began with, the question would be, well, first of all, are these really the only options? And if you unfortunately decide, yes, these are the only 2 things you can do, you can destroy the house, almost certainly killing the innocent victim as well as the terrorist. Or if you don't destroy the house, almost certainly what will happen is the terrorist will then kill many other people. So you would look at that situation and you would say, well, it's a terrible thing that an innocent child dies if I destroy the house. But it's also a terrible thing when other innocent people die because a terrorist detonates a bomb. And unfortunately, in this situation, there are far more other innocent people who will die if I don't direct the missile at the house. And so the utilitarian would say, on the assumption that these are really the only two options, that there is no way of getting the child away from the house in time, that the morally better thing to do is to launch the missile, kill the terrorist, and unfortunately also kill the innocent victim. And this distinguishes utilitarianism from some other approaches to ethics, some of which may say it is always wrong to kill, or maybe intentionally to kill, innocent people. And so in launching the missile, one of the things you're doing is killing the innocent child as well as killing the presumably not innocent terrorist and accomplices. So if it's always wrong to kill innocent people, then launching the missile would have to be wrong. You might think, well, wait a minute, if you don't launch the missile, haven't you killed the innocent victims in the marketplace? Non-utilitarian approaches would say, well, no, you haven't actually killed them. The terrorist is the one who's killed them. And so what you've done, if you don't launch the missile, is you've allowed them to die, or you've let them die. Not that that's a wonderful thing to do, but that it's worse, maybe infinitely worse, to kill innocent victims. And so in that case, some anti-utilitarian approaches would say, no, you can't launch the missile. Terrible as it is that the terrorists will destroy, hundreds of other innocent people, your choice is decided by the fact that you're not allowed to kill. So even if normally you wouldn't be allowed to let people die if you had an alternative, but if your alternative is even worse, morally speaking, which is to kill, then you can't do that. The utilitarian does not think that there is a morally important difference between you killing someone and you letting somebody die, because the important thing, again, is to say, well, what will happen if I do this? What will happen if I do that? And if the fact is that if I do this thing, and let's say don't launch the missile, what will happen is that hundreds of innocent people will die, even if it's not the case that I will have killed them, given that my behavior has made the difference to whether they die or not, then I have to take their deaths into consideration, and weighing their deaths against the death of the one innocent child. I mean, there's no good option, but the least bad option in that case is for me to kill the innocent child rather than for me to let the terrorist kill hundreds of other innocent people.
The deontologist is the person who thinks that what matters when you perform an action is not its consequences, but how your action comports with certain duties. So whether your action satisfies certain rules, which apply to all actions in all circumstances. And one of the rules that they're going to suggest is that, as you say, all innocent life is sacred and should never be sacrificed. And they're going to try and plug holes, or not plug, but puncture holes into your story, right? So they're going to say things like, well, you don't know for sure that this bomber is actually going to go to the market. The bomber might not. His vest might not detonate. He might have a change of mind. Your intelligence might be wrong as the intelligence operator who's watching the scenario from the outside. And you're just presuming this, and in so doing, you're killing an innocent life, you're killing an innocent person as a means to an end. And that end is not 100% certain. Perhaps you're quite certain, but not 100% certain. And that as philosophers, we can lean back in our armchairs and we can come up with an example that seems to only have two possible outcomes. But in real life, it's more complicated. And it's real life that these theories are supposed to tell us what to do, how to behave. So given that, the deontologist is going to say, but hold on, you don't fire the missile. You don't blow up the apartment or the household where the bomber is staying.
Right. You're absolutely right. The deontologist, which is a term sort of given to the main sort of anti-utilitarian approach, the deontologist will say things like that. But let me make a couple of points first. First of all, it's not true that deontologists in general, or even most of them, say that consequences don't matter. So most deontologists will say, yes, consequences do matter. You have to weigh them, and you have to somehow weigh them against the whole question of whether whether your behavior conforms to rules. So most deontologists will include, as one of their rules, the rule that you should, promote well-being, and that you should try and prevent suffering when you can. And so their rules will include rules that make reference to consequences. Now, the question about uncertainty, that's a very important question, right? And it's a very important point that, we usually cannot be certain of what the consequences of our actions will be. But of course, that's a point that cuts both ways. To the extent that it's merely the point that you can't be 100% certain, then this applies also to launching the missile. You can't be 100% certain that this will kill the innocent child. You can't be 100% certain that your colleagues on the ground have correctly identified that as an innocent child. Maybe there is one there, maybe there isn't. So if we're going to rely on like very small possibilities of error, then the small possibilities of error will apply to both sides, and they'll cancel each other out. So you can't sort of lean on that. In general, we all have to act under conditions of uncertainty. None of us knows exactly what's going to happen because of what we do. And we are faced with sort of differing degrees of certainty and uncertainty regarding the consequences of our behavior. So rules like, don't kill are generally applied in specific contexts. Right? How do you apply a rule like don't kill? Well, I'm pointing a gun at you, don't pull the trigger. Why don't pull the trigger? Well, because if you pull the trigger, then, you'll kill me. Well, are you certain you'll kill me? What if the gun jams? What if, what if at the last second my hand jerks and the bullet goes somewhere else? So uncertainty is not going to rescue a deontologist in a situation like that. Now, given that we have to operate under conditions of uncertainty, the question then is, well, what do we do with that uncertainty? What the utilitarian says is, well, you have to, do the best you can. And doing the best you can means, at least roughly trying to figure out what are the chances that something will happen, and how good or bad is it if that thing happens. So what the utilitarian, doesn't do is sort of fall back on what look like sort of comforting rules, like, well, never do this. So never kill an innocent person. Because then as I say, the question of uncertainty will apply to that too. So, well, okay, well, if I never kill an innocent person, presumably that doesn't mean I should never do anything that has any chance of an innocent person dying, because in this case, if I launch the missile, there's a very strong chance an innocent person will die. If I don't launch the missile, there's also a very strong chance that innocent people will die. So the question then is, why does it matter whether the death is brought about sort of immediately by me or by somebody else? If it's the terrorist who detonates the bomb, but the terrorist wouldn't have detonated the bomb if I had launched the missile, then of course I stand in what we might call the causal chain that leads up to the deaths of the people in the marketplace. And so my behavior is relevant. And what difference does it make whether my behavior in that case is, well, let's say, not launching a missile versus launching a missile in the other option, and that leads to the death of the innocent child? You might think, well, if you launch the missile, there's nothing between your behavior and the death of the child. At least there's nothing involving another person. And obviously there's something between it. The missile has to get launched, it has to fly through the air, it has to explode. There's all kinds of physical things that have to happen. But in terms of human choices, my choice is the last sort of human choice before the death of the child. Whereas if I don't launch the missile, and the result is that hundreds of people die in the marketplace, I made the choice not to launch the missile, but then other people have to make choices, in particular, maybe just the one, in particular, the terrorist has to make the choice to go to the market. But then the question is, well, why does this actually matter? That somebody else has to make a choice as well? we might come back to your, the earlier point you were pushing me on, which is, well, it matters because we don't know how other people are going to behave. But then that just comes back to the question of, levels of uncertainty. We could be, very, very, very clear that the terrorists will behave in this way without being certain, but just as we could be very, very, very clear that launching the missile will destroy the child as well as the building without being certain. There are many other situations where you might think, well, we wouldn't hesitate for a minute to think the right thing to do was to, kill somebody. I mean, let's say there was an attacker threatening a classroom full of children. Unfortunately, in the United States, this happens with, alarming frequency. Let's say that you were in the classroom and there was an attacker with an automatic weapon about to pull the trigger and kill a bunch of children. May go even further. Maybe the attacker's already killed one or two. So this is a real gun and this person is prepared to kill people, but there's still another 20 children there. Well, if you kill the attacker, then you will save the children. The fact that if you don't kill the attacker, for the other 20 children to die, somebody else would have to make a decision. The attacker would have to decide to keep on shooting. That doesn't let you off the hook for not killing them in this situation. This is a situation of defense of other innocent people. Now, of course, you might think the difference there is that in the case of killing a would-be school shooter, you're not killing an innocent person. Well, that's true. You're not killing an innocent person, whereas in the case of the child, you're killing an innocent person. But why would this make all the difference? I mean, you might think, well, yeah, it would make a difference if it was, you could achieve the same effect by killing an innocent person or a guilty person. But that's not the situation here. The situation here is that, a bunch of innocent people will die unless you kill, in my first example, one innocent person along with some guilty people, or in the school case, unless you kill one guilty person. But in either case, what's at stake is the lives of a lot of innocent people, and you can make the difference. So you might think that the deep underlying motivating thought behind this approach, utilitarianism, is that we can make a difference to how well or badly the world goes. And the difference we make is what's really important. If we can make a difference and we can make a good difference, then we should do that. We've got reason to do that. If we can make a bad difference, we've got reason not to do that. And that's what really counts. What really counts is the difference we can make to the world. Can we make the world a better place? Can we make the world a worse place? And if we can make the world a better place, we should do that. It's a very sort of simple thought. I mean, another way to motivate this is just imagine, again, this is a fictional situation, but it's not completely unrealistic. Imagine that you meet a friend who tells you that they had heard on the radio of something really significant happening in a distant country. But here's the problem. The radio reception wasn't particularly good, and they'd had a drink or two. And so they're not quite sure about the details of what they heard, but they are sure of this. Either what happened was that there was a disaster, maybe a natural disaster, which, say, killed 20,000 innocent people. Or what happened was that a breakthrough discovery had been made in treatment of a disease which had saved the lives of 20,000 people. They're sure about the 20,000 bit. That bit stuck in the mind, but they weren't quite sure which one it was. Was it that the 20,000 innocent people had died in a disaster, or was it that 20,000 people's lives have been saved because of a discovery? They know that one of these things had happened. And so now imagine your reaction to hearing that. So I think that, any ordinary, decent person, and hearing that would think, well, I hope it was the discovery that saved the lives, and one of these things happened. I certainly hope it wasn't that 20,000 people died. Now, notice something about this example. This example doesn't involve you making a choice. This example doesn't involve you trying to decide what to do. This example just involves you hoping that one thing happened rather than another. And that shows what you regard to be good versus bad. And of course, most ordinary decent people would regard it to be much better if 20,000 people's lives were saved than if 20,000 people's lives were snuffed out. And so given that you don't have the power to decide what happens, this is just a psychological fact about you. What do you hope happened? Now, I hope that you hope what happened was that the lives were saved rather than lost. And this shows that you think it would have been better if 20,000 innocent people had their lives saved rather than 20,000 innocent people had their lives snuffed out. And so this goes to show that you believe that the world will be a better place, putting aside any other differences. So as philosophers like to say, other things being equal, the world would be a better place if 20,000 people's lives were saved rather than if 20,000 people's lives were snuffed out. So one of the things that you value is, people living longer, not dying prematurely. Considering, situations like that can help you sort of figure out what you think of as making the world better rather than worse. I mean, you could also imagine variations on that example where instead of lives being lost versus saved, it was, either 20,000 people were subjected to, a considerable amount of suffering because, some disease got loosed on the land, non-fatal, but still, caused a lot of suffering, or the discovery was one which reduced a lot of suffering. Again, it didn't save lives, but it reduced suffering. So maybe a novel treatment for chronic back pain was discovered. Again, presumably you would hope that it was the suffering reducing thing that had happened rather than the suffering increasing thing that had happened. And that shows that you think that it's better when people suffer less rather than more.
I'd like to give you a couple of cases that make life more difficult for you. Thus far, you've given us, I think, quite intuitive cases where people are going to be sympathetic. So I think people think in a state of war, sometimes it'll be the case that innocent people will die to achieve a greater good. No one's going to fight you on whether they hope for people to, be in immense suffering or whether to experience amounts of pleasure. So let's try and give you cases that are tough. So imagine this. You've got a serial killer who's been, let's say, raping and killing women at an incredible pace. He's beaten out the Green River Killer, so he's over 50, dead women. And he's very wily, so he's very good at sort of escaping, the grasp of the police. And he puts forward a proposal. He says, look, guys, I've got this long list of women that I want to rape and kill. And I kind of do one a month. But I'll tell you what, if you just surrender one of them to me, I won't do it, this year. And just one every year, make a sacrifice to me. I'll rape her and I'll kill her. I'm going to do it anyway. It's the same woman. I'm giving you a list. I'm going to hunt her down. I'm going to do it myself. But I just want you guys to do it and I'll kill a lot less people. Utilitarian has to say that is the correct thing to do. You have to submit yourself to the moral blackmail. You have to participate in the serial killer's scheme because that's what yields the least amount of suffering. You are bound on that. Here's a second case. So you mentioned to me, animal suffering rarely matters. And we know that we kill hundreds of millions of animals in very cruel ways. And there might be a way to stop that, which is to actively take steps to shut down, let's say, slaughterhouses and to engage in acts of terrorism. So what you should do is you should plant bombs at some of these places. You kill a couple of innocent factory workers, but you create enough fear that you try and shut down the meat production industry. And let's assume we can put all the uncertainty stuff aside. You're going to be successful. You are going to save these hundreds of millions of animals, and you just have to kill a couple of, innocent, factory workers. But you will have maximized the good. You will have generated a state of affairs that is objectively better if we care about, pain and pleasure. And I think you have to bite both of those bullets, and I want to see how you do on that.
So, I mean, this is, as you know, this is a standard response to utilitarianism. So let me do what might seem like cheating just for a moment to make a point, and then I'll come back and address what these cases in particular. So let's say I come across somebody who has a different moral approach from me, and this person says, "Yeah, I think the right thing to do is whatever God says." is right. I believe in this theory, divine command theory. What God says is right. I mean, God is perfect. Obviously, what God says is right. And so I say, well, imagine for a minute, that there's, I don't know, let's take your example. There's someone who's raping and killing people, and I'm the police chief, and I don't know what to do. And then, and God says to me, here's what you should do. You need to sacrifice to me, painfully, a couple of virgins. Take them to the top of the ziggurat, make X-shaped crosses, and pull out their hearts and hold them up, and and then I'll stop it. But you shouldn't do it because I'll stop it. You should do it because I'm telling you to do it, because I'm the Lord your God. And I said, well, look, you divine command theorist, you have to bite the bullet. You have to say that's the right thing to do. Now, of course, what would a divine command theorist say to that? Well, on the one hand, the divine command theorist might say, well, yeah, if God really did say that, that would be the right thing to do. But God's not going to say that because God's good. Right? So, I mean, here's the thing. Any moral theory can be subject to that kind of response. Let's say you believe in the theory that Immanuel Kant advocates. Now, Kant says, act on the maxim that you can will to be a universal, and there's notorious difficulties in figuring out, what does this mean? I mean, how do we tell whether you can will a maxim to be a universal law? Well, different Kantians disagree. So I could say, aha, Kantian, I've got you. What if this maxim, what if this principle that Kant calls the categorical imperative, what if the categorical imperative tells you to, deliver up some virgins to a rapist, once a month? What if the categorical imperative tells you to do that? Well, then, Kantian, you've got to bite the bullet and say it would be right to do that. But the Kantian would say, but the categorical imperative wouldn't say that. Really? I mean, I've never met two Kantians who agree on what the categorical imperative actually says. So, I mean, we can always say, what if your moral theory told you to do this thing, and this thing is a horrible thing? Then you'd have to say it was right to do this thing. So on one level, the correct answer is, well, yeah, if my theory really told me to do that thing, then yes, it would be the right thing to do. And a Kantian has to say that if the categorical imperative told him to sacrifice, people to the rapist would be the right thing to do. The divine command theorist has to say if God told him to do this, it would be the right thing to do. Likewise, if the utilitarian would say, yeah, if it really would maximize utility to do that, meaning it will be the best of all possible options, it will be the right thing to do. Now, in my particular version of utilitarianism, this gets slightly more complicated. I say we shouldn't focus on questions of what's right or wrong. We should focus on what's better or worse. But we can get the same problem could arise. You could say, well, look, my theory, the morally best thing to do would be to deliver the victims to this murderous rapist. If that, if really all the other options led to worse consequences. So what should we say to this? I mean, it's not very satisfying to say, well, look, if your theory really tells you to do that, then you should do that, because no theory is going to be better or worse off than any other theory in that respect. Because you could say, well, imagine that your theory tells you to do this. Well, for any theory, you could imagine your theory tells you to do this sort of horrible thing. So then the question we have to ask ourselves is, well, what's going on with our moral thinking when we sort of engage in this kind of dialogue? And here's how the dialectic works. It's somewhat parallel to scientific reasoning. So here's what's going on. Okay, a moral theory is like a scientific theory in the sense that it's a theory about, well, scientific theory is theories about, what happens if, or how the world works, what happens if this happens, then what happens next, which electrons will do what, which protons will do the other thing, can you pinpoint the place and position and velocity at the same time, and how many dimensions are there with vibrating strings and all that kind of stuff. Moral theories tell you, what the moral characteristics of certain choices would be. So would actions be right or wrong? Would they be better or worse? That kind of thing. So how do we test scientific theories? Well, to the extent that we can test scientific theories, we ask, what predictions do these theories make? Well, a theory might make the prediction, for example, let's say an Aristotelian theory about gravity. That might make the prediction, and apologies to ancient philosophers of science if I've got this wrong, but it might make the prediction that heavy objects will fall faster than light objects. Well, famously, we can actually test that. We can drop two things of different weights in a vacuum, because we have to take away wind resistance, and obviously we can't create a perfect vacuum. We get close enough, right? Drop two things of different weights in a vacuum and see what happens. Well, when we do that, we discover no, heavy things and light things in fact fall at the same rate. So we have falsified this, this particular approach to physics in this case. Well, how do we do that for moral theories? Where we say, well, okay, treat a moral theory as if it were a scientific theory making predictions. What kind of predictions? Predictions about which actions would be better or worse, right or wrong, good or bad, that kind of thing. So according to the utilitarian, and this is what you just did, right? According to the utilitarian, we can say, if the world were like this, if the situation were like this, then the theory says the right thing to do is this thing, right? In this case, deliver the victim to the murderous rapist once a month or once a year. I've forgotten the details now, but yeah, do what the rapist demands, right? If the world is like that, then that's the right thing to do. So just like a physical theory might say, if you set up the world so you've got, a feather and a lead weight, and you drop them, and the lead weight drops faster, in a vacuum. Test it. Oh, it doesn't. Well, that theory is wrong. So how do you test the moral theory? Well, here's the way it's supposed to work. You consider the situation, you perform what we call a thought experiment. So it's like a physical experiment, except you can do it in your armchair. You perform this thought experiment. Now, what's the equivalent of observing the two things falling, right? In the physical theory, we have an observation, and we say, oh, no, they actually fell at the same rate. So the theory is wrong. The prediction was they fall at different rates. They fell at the same rate. Theory is wrong. Well, the equivalent is we see whether the action really is right or wrong. So we say to the utilitarian, okay, if the world's like this, you have to do this thing. You have to deliver the victim. Well, now let's observe it. And we say, oh, but we observe that that's the wrong thing to do. That's the crucial point. How do we observe that that's the wrong thing to do? Well, we use what philosophers call intuition. We confront the theory, and then we sort of realize that we feel horrified at the thought of handing over the victim. We think, wow, no, that would be a terrible thing to do. So the equivalent of observing the two things falling is observing our own feelings, our own reactions, our intuitive judgment. Now, how you describe it might make a difference to how good a method you think this is. If you describe it as just seeing how you feel, it doesn't sound that reliable. If you describe it as, sort of consulting your considered moral judgment, which has been honed over many years in very expensive boarding school and then Oxford, and drinking a lot of port with similar-minded people, then actually now I come to think of it, it doesn't sound very reliable then either, does it? And that's kind of the point. All we've got to go on when we make this judgment that what the utilitarian says is the right thing to do is actually the wrong thing to do. All we've got to go on is our reaction to it, right? But why do we think it really would be wrong to turn over the guy to the rapist? Well, here's one possibility. We think it really would be wrong because it really would be wrong, right? But then we say, okay, well, what convinces us it really would be wrong? And here's the tricky thing. In the real world, no police chief, no ordinary person, or even extraordinary person could ever be sure that turning over the innocent victim to the rapist would have the best results. In fact, there are very good reasons to think it wouldn't have the best results. I mean, even if in this particular case, even if it's true that the rapist really would have sort of foiled us, knowing who the victims are, we are physically incapable of protecting them from the rapist. We can't build, a fortress that's strong enough to stop the rapist breaking in. I mean, what kind of wimps are we? But, even if we were convinced of that, what about the precedent-setting effect of giving in to, rapist demands? We could say, well, look, even in this, in this particular case, let's assume, and again, I don't think we should ever assume this, but let's assume that regarding the behavior of this particular rapist, giving into this particular rapist demands would have better effects than not giving into this rapist demands. But this isn't the only rapist in the world. This isn't the only person who might think, aha, I can blackmail the police. I can extort behavior from the police. And so the consequentialist, the utilitarian, consequentialism is just the general term given to the approach that says we focus on the consequences of our behavior. Utilitarianism is the best known version of this approach, the version associated with Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, which says that it's sort of happiness or well-being of sentient creatures, humans and animals alike, which determines how good or bad things are. But you might think other things are good or bad as well. And so you might say, I focus on consequences, but not just on well-being. But so the consequentialist, would say, well, look, you can't just look at the immediate effect, right? You have to look at the effects to, as far out as you can make any predictions. And of course, the further into the future you go, the less reliable the predictions are. But until you get to the point where you say, look, it's 50-50. I have no more reason to think this will happen than that. Then you should still take into account anything that you have, some reason to think is more likely to go this way rather than that. So in this particular case, we might say, look, there's a very good reason why we're all horrified at the thought of handing over innocent victims to, murderous rapists. And that's because in the world as it is, and the world as it's always been, and the world that has shaped our psychological reactions to things, it's always worse to do that. Or, if it's not always worse to do that, it's like almost always worse to do that. And so it's a very good thing that we have this visceral reaction against it, because almost always this reaction leads us in the right direction. Now, of course, philosophers in their armchairs, will say, aha, but what about the exceptional case? What if I just specify that, in fact, this is the exceptional case? Well, yeah, we can do that. We can specify that this is the exceptional case. But then the question is, why should we trust our intuitive reaction to a case like that? Given that our intuitive reactions are not, they're not sort of, just sort of innate. Intuitive reactions are honed by our upbringing. Excuse me just a second, I have to let the cat out of this room. He usually complains when I start talking and leaves earlier, but I think he was too busy sleeping. Okay, so the intuitive reactions we have to things are a matter of our upbringing, a matter of the social pressures that we've been subjected to throughout our entire lives. And one way that we can see that is to consider the sort of different intuitive reactions that people have who are raised in different ways. I grew up in England and then went to the States, or came to the States for graduate school, and I've stayed here. But I noticed pretty early on that I had very different sort of intuitive reactions to certain kinds of social and political issues from most of the Americans around me. So on the question of, say, the provision of healthcare, I was absolutely horrified at the thought that someone could be bankrupted by ill health, because no matter what you might think about the British National Health Service, it didn't have to pay for it. You paid for it through taxes, but everybody paid for it through taxes and basically paid, different amounts depending on what you could afford. And if you were unemployed, you weren't going to pay paying anything. So the idea that the level of healthcare you get, or at least whether you get life-saving healthcare at all, it should be a matter of what you could afford. It struck me as horrifying. Also, the American obsession with guns struck me as very strange, because again, I grew up in a country where the idea that everyone should have access to like handguns, it was just crazy. It was crazy because that's the way I was raised. Now that kind of stuck with me. I still think it's kind of crazy, although I've lived in this country longer than I lived in the UK, and I understand how people have different reactions to these things, but the point here is that our reactions in general, our reactions to morally loaded things in general, are very much a matter of our upbringing, and how much we should trust them. It is a tricky issue. So we can't get by without consulting these reactions at all. I mean, you can't sort of think about morality without thinking about your intuitive reactions to certain cases. But that doesn't mean that you should take sort of every one of these things at face value. We might think, well, look, certain kinds of reactions might be more reliable than other kinds of reactions. And if we can see that certain kinds of reactions are sort of highly dependent on particular sort of social or economic features of the society in which we grew up, or features of our own situation in that society, then we should be more suspicious of trusting them. So when it comes to the animal rights example that you raised, what most utilitarians would say about that is, well, yeah, if the way you can save, and it's not hundreds of millions, it's billions. If the way you can save billions of lives, if the only way you can save billions of lives involves, killing a handful of innocent people, then that really would be the right thing to do. But again, we've got massive amounts of experience in the real world with animal rights activists, and for better or worse, they tend to engender more hostility than sympathy. Now, this is probably because agribusiness is very powerful and so will shape the narrative. But my view is that a sort of terrorist activity with the aim of helping animals will almost certainly backfire, because it will actually be counterproductive. If I honestly believed that I could save billions of lives by taking a small number of lives, human or otherwise, I would think that would be the better thing to do. But I don't believe that, because again, I live in a world in which people are sort of painted as terrorists simply for protesting, let alone doing things like blowing things up. I mean, the United States government will classify animal rights activists as terrorists, even if they just protest and maybe chant and shout a bit. But of course, there's very powerful economic incentives for them to do that, because there's billions of dollars in the raising and exploitation and infliction of suffering on animals.
But there's another kind of case that's more difficult maybe for the utilitarian, which involves weighing someone's death against a whole lot of less severe forms of suffering that a whole lot of other individuals will have, which together, according to the utilitarian, when summed up, will amount to more than the death. So, for example, suppose that there's a whole lot of people who will experience a headache unless you take a particularly hated politician and put him on television and kill him in front of everyone, in which case their headaches will abate, because they'll feel, oh goodness, what a relief. This politician was causing us all such headaches. If we would just kill this politician, we'll all feel so much better. Now, it seems like the deontologist or the Kantian would say, hold on, you can't kill one person to save not just the lives of many others, but the headaches of many others. Now, when it comes to the lives of many others, perhaps you can sway our intuitions and you can explain away those intuitions, but it's not as easy to do so in cases where you're weighing up one person's life against lots of other people's, not their lives, but their headaches. So the question is, well, the deontologist intuitively, pre-philosophically, gives us the right answer. You can't kill the politician to save everyone a headache. And imagine it's a small headache. It's like just a little thump in your forehead, but it's millions of people experiencing this little thump. Perhaps they only experience it for 5 minutes. All those millions of people in the country will be prevented from this little thump in their foreheads for 5 minutes. If we kill the politician, the deontologist says, don't do it. The utilitarian says, do it.
Jason, you're supposed to make the case that's counterintuitive. I want you to make Alastair's life difficult.
Yeah.
Instead, you've picked a politician. You're going to have people cheering on, fucking kill him.
That was going to be my first response. So it just set the lions on him back there.
very nice politician. So
Okay.
let's say he's not a nasty politician. He's just irritating, and he just
irritating.
just a little thump in people's foreheads for 5 minutes.
Right.
But lots of people.
Yeah.
We could just get rid of him, and their headaches would disappear.
Yes. No, that's right. That's an excellent point. So one response to this is to go back to what you said when you were sort of setting the scene for this example, which is to say, I've been talking about cases where your choices involve what you might think of as harms that are in the same category. And in this case, exactly the same category. I've been talking about sort of, these people dying versus those people dying, or these animals dying. But, death, basically preventing or causing the harm of death to some versus others, few versus many. We might say, well, yeah, these are difficult cases in the sense that they're psychologically difficult, but maybe morally speaking, they're not that difficult. They're like, rescue situations. So, commonly philosophers will talk about situations where you imagine that there are people sort of like clinging to a lifeboat that's sinking, and maybe there are 5 people off in that direction, and there's one person off in that direction, and you're in between them, and you can go one way and save 5 people, or you can go the other way and save one person, but you can't get to them all before they drown. If you save the 5, the one will be dead before you can get back to them. If you save the 1, the 5 will be dead before you get back to them. And so then pretty much everybody, not just utilitarians and other consequentialists, but pretty much every moral theorist, not absolutely everyone, actually. There are 1 or 2 people who disagree with this, but the overwhelming majority of philosophers will say, well, yeah, you should save the larger number in that case. But then that's because, we're talking about the same category. So you might think, okay, well, here's a suggestion. You can compare these harms when they're in the same category. But what you can't do is sort of compare in the sense of sort of adding up, so that in theory one side might outweigh the other, or the other side might outweigh the one, depending on what's on each side. You can't do that when the harms are of sort of radically different sizes. So in your extreme example, death in the one case, even just of one person, like an irritating politician, versus the harm of a small headache for millions, thousands, or maybe millions of others. So the suggestion then would be, well, yeah, we'll restrict our comparisons to harms of the same magnitude. But then the question is, okay, well, what do we mean by the same magnitude? Does that mean we can only compare death with death, so that anything short of death could not outweigh a single death? And then it starts to get pretty counterintuitive. So let me sort of give you a realistic case. In fact, a kind of choice that is faced by decision makers, a lot, and then I'll make it a bit more schematic. So the realistic case is this: imagine a healthcare system that's charged with delivering what you might think of as optimal levels of healthcare to the population of a country. Many nations have such healthcare systems. Most Western European nations have some kind of nationalized, universal healthcare. Other nations have that too. Some notoriously don't have that, even very wealthy ones, like the most wealthy one in the world. But imagine that you're in one of these countries, let's say, England. Maybe I should say the UK, but I recently learned from a friend of mine that the healthcare system in Scotland is actually technically different from in England. The National Health Service Scotland is a different organization. So let's just focus on England. Well, you've got limited resources, right? Some would say too limited, but there's not an infinite amount of resources, not an infinite amount of money. And so you might be faced with the following kind of choice. You might be faced with the choice between devoting a large chunk of these resources to extending the lives of terminally ill people by a few months, perhaps by dialysis or other sort of quite expensive machinery, or for the same expenditure of resources, you might be able to provide life-enhancing treatments to a much larger number of people. So, for example, hip replacements. The evidence shows that hip replacements make a huge difference to the quality of life of people who have them. Cataract surgery, likewise, makes a huge difference to the quality of life of people who have this. But people who need cataract surgery, people who need hip replacements, are not in danger of dying if they don't have these things. They're in danger of having, well, obviously they're in danger of dying eventually, but they're not in danger of dying prematurely if they don't have these things. What happens is that their lives go considerably better if they have them and worse if they don't have them. Now, very few people think that faced with a choice like this, you've always got to go with the thing that'll keep people alive the longest. I mean, one way to sort of see that you probably agree with that is just imagine the life extension getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Imagine, okay, so for this amount of money, we can give people dialysis for 6 months, extend their lives for 6 months. Well, let's say instead of that, we could extend their lives for 3 months. Or maybe there's a treatment where, people who are very close to death, we could extend their life for a week. And it gets more and more expensive. At some point, pretty much, I mean, people disagree about where the point is, but pretty much everyone will agree, well, at some point, it will be better to enhance the quality of the life of more people rather than save the lives, especially given that saving the life here just means, they don't die now, they die in a week. Because again, technically saving a life always means you don't die now, you die later. The only question is how much later. So it's always a question about, how much extra life you give someone. It's not like life versus death. Death comes to us all. Now, given that we all agree that in certain choice situations, preventing a harm that's short of death, in this case, let's say, chronic pain, to a large number of people would be better than preventing death to a small number of people. The question then is, okay, well, how close? Well, let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say that we'll define severe mutilation as a non-life-threatening but severely life-affecting harm. And we'll say that whatever level of mutilation we're talking about, it's the level which you think will be severe enough that if you were faced with the choice between saving one person's life and saving 100 people from severe mutilation, it'd be better to save the 100 people from being severely mutilated. Now, I mean, if your response is, well, there's no number, then I just don't believe you, because you could make it, so bad that at some point you're going to have to say, well, look, wait a minute, if it's that bad, it's better to save 100 people from something that's that bad than one person from death. But if you grant me that, now I can get you all the way to headaches. Because you grant me that and say, well, okay, whatever the level of horrible mutilation, terrible suffering is that you think will be severe enough that it's better to prevent 100 people from having that bad a degree of mutilation than one person from dying. Now imagine a level of suffering it doesn't have to be caused by mutilation. Mutilation gets people's, juices flowing, but, we're really just talking about the suffering that comes from mutilation. Imagine a level that's just a little bit less than that. It's still pretty damn bad. It's just a little bit less than that. Well, presumably we can imagine a level that's not quite as bad as what, I'm calling severe mutilation, maybe almost severe mutilation. But it's bad enough that rather than saving 100 people from severe mutilation, it would be better to save 10,000 people from almost severe mutilation. In other words, 100 times that. And now, of course, we say, okay, well, but what about the next level then? The next level, which is still close enough to almost severe mutilation, that if it was, quick calculation, 1 million, right? That's 100 times, yeah, 1 million people suffering from nearly almost severe mutilation. I'm not sure if these adjectives are going in the right direction, but imagine that that's going down. Nearly almost severe mutilation, better to prevent 1 million people from suffering that than 10,000 people from suffering or nearly or almost severe mutilation. The next one up. But anyway, it would be tedious to keep doing this. But the point is, you could imagine at each step, you could imagine a sort of degree of harm that's just a little bit less, but it's still close enough to the next one up that we think, well, look at the choices between, preventing this harm to, higher harm to one person, or the slightly less severe harm to 100 people. It's better to prevent it to 100 people. And then what you've got is you've got a series of judgments that start out by saying it's better to prevent 100 severe mutilations than one death. It's better to prevent 10,000 almost severe mutilations than 100 severe mutilations. It's better to prevent 1 million nearly almost severe mutilations than 10,000 almost severe mutilations, and so on. And you could keep extending this sequence until you got down to a minor headache. On the assumption that a minor headache, it's minor, but it's still better that it not happen. If we get to the point where we say it makes no difference at all, then we've gone off the end of the moral scale. So it's got to be something where we say, well, look, it's still better that you not have this minor headache than that you have it. Well, presumably there's a slightly more severe headache, which is worse than that, but still it's not that much worse than that. So it's better to prevent 100 of these minor headaches than just one of these slightly more or slightly less minor headache. But when you've got this whole sequence, if A is better than B, and B is better than C, and C is better than D, and D is better than E, and so on, then A is better than the very last thing in that sequence. And the last thing in that sequence is, in the example that you gave, Jason, is like minor headaches. The reason we know that is that better than obeys this sort of mathematical principle of transitivity, right? Which is, I think of it in mathematical terms. If 4 is bigger than 2 and 2 is bigger than 1, then 4 is bigger than 1. So bigger than obeys this. So better than also obeys this principle of transitivity. It would be very strange if, let's say you're faced with 3 options, and option A is better than B, option B is better than C, but option C is better than A. And by better than, I mean taking everything into account better than. Obviously, things can be better than other things in different respects. So you might, Mark, you might be a better chess player than me, and I might be a better runner than Jason. Nothing follows about whether Mark is better than Jason in any respect, because we've switched respect: better chess player, better runner. But in the case of judging outcomes as being better or worse, we're talking about taking everything into account. All things considered, better that I suffer like this, or I suffer like that, or I suffer like that. So that's why better than obeys this principle of transitivity. If it didn't obey the principle of transitivity, the world will be a completely irrational place. You could, for example, make lots of money off somebody by continually offering them alternatives. If you prefer B to A, and you prefer C to B, and you prefer A to C, and you start out with A, I could say, well, look, I'll give you B if you give me $5. So I give you B, and I got C. Give me C. I'll give you C if you give me another $5. Now I've got $10 off you, but I've also got A because you gave me A when I gave you B. There's the exchange. So now I can give you A and another $5, and we're back to where we started with. You're back to where you were, and I've got 15 of your dollars, and I could just keep doing this. This is what philosophers call a money pump. So it's not irrational like that. People are irrational. People do have preferences that are intransitive. There's a lot of research that's shown that. But nobody thinks that this is a good thing. This is a flaw in our reasoning. We're not perfect reasoners. In fact, we're pretty bad at reasoning in general. The world is not irrational. People are irrational. And so now this is one of these bullets again. I say, okay, so what does all this tell us? Well, what all this tells us is that, yeah, in theory, if the headaches we're talking about are actually bad, even if just a little bit, but actually bad, they are such that it would be better not to have them than to have them, other things being equal, then yes. And the death of this politician you're talking about, so so it's none of the politicians that we're thinking of, right? So that's the point. If the death of this particular person is also bad, then in theory, there is a number of headaches, which is large enough that if you could prevent those headaches by killing the politician, it would be better to kill the politician than to let people have the headaches. But of course, again, we think, wow, but that seems wrong. It can't, no number of headaches. It's just counterintuitive. Well, I refer you back to my earlier answer about how much we should trust intuitions. And the other thing, of course, is that just because I say there are some number of headaches, which is large enough that preventing that number of people from having this minor headache would justify killing a person, doesn't commit me to any answer about what that number is. It might be more, the number might be big enough that is more bigger than the number of sentient beings in the universe. I mean, I suspect it's not that big, actually. I mean, I don't mean by not that big, it's small. What I mean is it's not as big as the number of sentient beings in the universe. But almost certainly, it's a number that's sort of so large that no matter what we did to the world to try and sort of bring about this situation, we would never be able to create a situation in which you really could, A, prevent that number of headaches by killing someone, and B, there's no better way to prevent that number of headaches than by killing somebody. So again, our intuitions, of course, it's never right in the real world to kill somebody to try and stop people having headaches. But that's because in the real world, A, you're not going to stop people having headaches by killing people, or at least if you did, there would be other ways you could stop them having headaches short of killing somebody. You know, ban this politician from appearing on TV. He might not like it, but presumably he'd prefer it to being killed. And in fact, then, you know, the numbers would sort of never get big enough. So yeah, I am committed to the view that, yes, in theory, you can compare harms of radically different sizes. As the sizes, you know, as the difference in size gets bigger, it becomes much more difficult to do the comparison. And so, again, given that we live in the real world and we're not just philosophers sitting in armchairs making stuff up, and we have to make choices in the real world, you know, it's a pretty good rule of thumb that if somebody says, you know, should you kill somebody to prevent headaches, your answer should always be no. But it should always be no, because in the real world, it always will be no, but it doesn't mean that there aren't theoretically possible circumstances in which the answer will be yes. But those theoretically possible circumstances aren't going to impinge on our experience. And so, A, we shouldn't expect our intuitive reactions to those thought experiments to tell us anything about morality. And B, we shouldn't have to worry about them because we're not going to encounter them.
So I want to ask you about this. I often think about moral theories as being reasons for action, that they create obligations on us. They tell us how we ought to behave. Now, what you've described is a very useful system for comparing states of affairs. So we can sort of tell this is much worse than this. This has more goods than bads. And one of the typical concerns with utilitarianism is that it can make you make dramatic sacrifices, that you can lose all of your freedoms because you could, instead of recording an episode with us, you could be, you know, spending time looking after someone who's sick and dying. You could be, you know, instead of buying luxurious goods, you could be spending that money, you know, saving people from dying of malaria, you know. And this idea that the theory is overly demanding, that it collapses the distinction between what you ought to do and what would be best to do. You know, that's the beyond the call of duty sort of distinction. But I wonder if there's a way to get out of that. In other words, if you can at one point say, well, I can recognize that this would be the most good thing, but that doesn't mean that I have an obligation to do that. That there's a distinction between a theory that tells you what the right thing to do is and a theory that tells you what a good thing to do is.
Yes, excellent question, and that, you know, I mean, in a nutshell, that is my approach to utilitarianism. My view, which is a non-standard view. So, I mean, some people in you know, in the world of academic ethics, which is a small and insular world, you know, some people sort of think of me as the arch utilitarian, but others think of me as a heretical utilitarian, because in fact, I do say that the notion of obligation, which is often equated with the notion of right and wrong, the idea is, you know, you're obligated to do what's right and to avoid what's wrong. The notion of obligation, I say, has no place in a theory like utilitarianism. That what the theory is really fundamentally about is a theory of comparative moral reasons. It's a theory that tells you how much moral reason you have to behave in one way rather than another. And of course, it can apply to not just to behavior. It can apply to, say, you know, states of character. You know, so how good or bad a character you have is also a question that utilitarians concern themselves with. So So yes, I mean, I agree that fundamentally utilitarianism doesn't make demands, in the sense that I don't think that the notion of a demand is sort of grounded in what I think of as sort of fundamental moral reality. But of course, people talk about right and wrong all the time. So some people would then say to my approach, but you've sort of thrown out the baby with the bathwater at this point. I mean, how can you have a moral theory if it doesn't tell you what to do? And theories tell you what to do by telling you what's right and what's wrong, or what obligations you have, how you meet the demands of morality. And the notion of a demand of morality then leaves open the possibility that we could go beyond the demands of morality. You mentioned going above and beyond. This is a notion in ethics known as supererogation. Roughly speaking, going above and beyond the demands of duty. You imagine somebody, one person doing as much as morality requires them to do, and somebody else in the same situation going beyond that by maybe, well, usually that involves the idea of sort of sacrificing some of their own interests. So it's not just that they do something that's more than what morality demands, it's that it's also sort of sacrificial on their own part. So it might, the ultimate sacrifice, of course, would be sort of laying down their life, but there are other sacrifices you can make, such as, not enjoying this time talking to you, but spending my time building houses for the homeless, or that kind of thing. So yes, I mean, we do typically think that morality is in the business, at least partly in the business of telling us what to do. And by that, I think ultimately what we mean is guiding our behavior. And what I think is that, our behavior can be guided by providing reasons, and reasons themselves can be comparative. So our behavior can be guided by telling us simply, well, I've got more reason to do this than that. I've got even more reason to do this thing than that thing. And we don't need to add, and what I really ought to do, what I have to do, what's the right thing to do, what would be wrong not to do is this other thing. Maybe, the sort of the most sacrificial thing. Does that mean that we should then sort of stop using terms like right and wrong, obligation, demand? Not necessarily. As a utilitarian, I judge everything, including conventions of language, by the results of employing those things, those conventions. So would the world be a better place if everyone were raised to think in purely comparative terms, if we stopped using words like right and wrong, or similar kinds of concepts? I honestly don't know. I mean, I do know, having raised a child and seen many friends raising other children, and being a child myself many years ago, that when you sort of start out with any kind of normative education, some moral education being the obvious one, any kind of sort of teaching people how to behave, it's easiest to start out with what looks like simple rules. And what look like simple rules are do this and don't do that. I mean, religions are full of this. Think of Christianity and the Ten Commandments. It's a bunch of do's and don'ts. Do this, don't do that. 3, 4, 5-year-old children probably wouldn't respond very well to being told, well, think about what's better and worse, and just, sort of guide your behavior according to sort of how much better certain options are. You're told, don't do this, don't lie, don't pull the cat's tail, don't hit your brother. And, do, I don't know, it's usually don't, but I'm sure there are some things we're told to do. But here's the thing, once we get to be adults, we can start thinking in slightly more sophisticated ways. So I think of, deontological approaches to ethics, approaches that focus on rules like, it's wrong to do this, it's right to do that, as the morality of the nursery. But that doesn't mean it's only for children, because many people behave like children. So it still might be a good thing that we have lots of rule. I mean, clearly, when it comes to legal rules, we have to put things in terms of, here are the standards that you have to meet, and if you don't meet these standards, you're subject to legal punishment. I say clearly, I guess I haven't really explored in detail what it would be like for legal rules to behave in this more sort of nuanced, what I call scalar fashion. But of course, when it comes to morality, what we might say is, what I say is, yeah, fundamentally, there's only comparative judgments of better or worse. Fundamentally, the facts are that maybe it would have been slightly better if I hadn't, if I'd blown you guys off and I helped build houses for the homeless. Maybe. I don't know, because I can't now go to that other possible world and see what that's like. But does that mean I've done the wrong thing by doing this? Well, imagine what the world would be like if we basically encouraged everyone to think that you're a moral failure unless you do the absolutely best thing you can do on every particular occasion. Well, here's one possibility, I think a very strong possibility. If we tried to do that, then people would give up on morality because they would find it too difficult. Now, that doesn't mean that on any particular occasion it's too difficult to do the best thing, because in a sense, if it's literally too difficult to do the best thing, then it's not the best thing, because when the standard utilitarian, not me, but the standard utilitarian who does have an account of what's right and wrong, who says the right thing to do is the best thing, this is called a maximizing utilitarian. What they mean by best is best of all the options that are actually available to you. And so if an option is literally too difficult for you to do it, then it's not an option. I mean, it doesn't count. So what you should do is the best thing of all those things that you actually can do. But it could still be the case that even though, telling you to do the best thing on every occasion doesn't mean that there's any particular occasion where, you literally can't do it. What it might mean is that if you try to behave like this throughout your life, you very quickly sort of give up and say, well, morality is not for me. It's too difficult. Peter Singer, who's also a utilitarian, who I think is still a standard maximizing utilitarian, although I'm working on him, and he claims that he is actually quite sympathetic to my approach. He got me to address one of his seminars and talk about this stuff. I mean, Singer has recognized this. I mean, his official view over the years has been the right thing to do is the very best thing, and for him, that's in terms of maximizing the amount of well-being, both human and animal, in the world. He used to think of it in terms of satisfying preferences, but he's now changed his mind and has an approach that's more like mine and many other utilitarians. We're talking about sort of amounts of happiness and unhappiness, suffering and well-being. He also recognizes that telling people that the only way you can sort of be a moral person is by doing the best thing will probably be counterproductive. And so in a lot of his public pronouncements, he will focus on specific goals that are reasonably demanding, but still attainable. So, for example, tithing, the practice of giving 10% of your, now it can vary depending on whether you mean of your total income or your disposable income. Obviously, if it's disposable income, it's going to be a lot less overall, depending on what you mean by disposable, so what you count as necessities. But I mean, even if it's just disposable income, it's still probably more than the vast majority of people give, although not Peter, he gives considerably more than that. But telling people that what you need to do is give like 10%, as opposed to you need to figure out the most you can possibly give without reducing yourself to a state of such abject poverty that you're worse off than the people you're trying to help, or that then you won't be able to keep earning money to help people. That you're going to achieve more good by telling people to do that. And so you could think, well, okay, you could imagine an approach that says, yeah, the right thing to do, an approach that's consistent with my version of utilitarianism, that says the right thing to do is to do, at least as much good as sort of the appropriate ideal. And the appropriate ideal, what we call the appropriate ideal, might actually vary depending on who we're talking to and what situation we utter those words. And this general approach is called contextualism. So we might say, yeah, fundamentally, the only facts about morality are how much better or worse certain options are. And so we might say, yeah, the very best thing you can do is this, and that's it. It's not like that, we also add that's the right thing to do. That's the very best thing to do. But when we make claims like you did the right thing, or even you went above and beyond the call of duty, then we're invoking a concept of an appropriate sort of ideal or appropriate option. And what could be appropriate in one circumstance might be different from what's appropriate in another circumstance. And I'm not talking about different behavior, the circumstance being, I helped out in this situation like that. I'm talking about the very same behavior being judged by different people in different circumstances. And so I mean, imagine a group of people who adhere to the philosophy, in as much as we can call it that, of Ayn Rand, who's, roughly speaking, an ethical egoist. So, well, not roughly speaking. I mean, she has an article called "The Virtue of Selfishness." She's the arch ethical egoist, is Ayn Rand. So imagine a bunch of Randians. They call themselves objectivists, but I think that's a horrible misappropriation of language. So imagine a bunch of Randians, and they're talking about, a friend of theirs who's donated a certain amount of money to charity. And they said, wow, that was a super duper good thing of that person to do. Because Randians don't say, you can't help others. I mean, Ayn Rand, herself quite specifically said to somebody, if you want to help people, go ahead and do it. That's up to you. So you can imagine them saying that was a super duper good thing to do, because those people in their circumstance, they think, well, yeah, the way you actually live up to the demands of morality is you don't, well, technically for a Randian, it's you don't harm yourself, but they might go slightly further and say you don't sort of actively harm other people. And so if you help people a little bit, well, that's really good. But then you could also imagine, a group of Christians who have a strong commitment to charity and to something like a principle of beneficence. I mean, I happen to think that when, Christ, the literary Christ, I have no idea if there was a real Christ or if there was what he actually said. But the literary Christ said, love thy neighbor. I interpret that to mean, maximize the good. I think Christ was a utilitarian. I mean, again, the literary Christ. So imagine a bunch of Christians who say, well, so-and-so, gave $10 to charity. That was pretty mean-spirited. They could afford a lot more than that. And so the Randians might say, yeah, that person went above and beyond because they weren't required to give anything to charity. The Christians might say, well, that person gave a lot less than they should have given because, at a very minimum, they should have given more than that. And they're judging the very same piece of behavior. And both groups of people might be saying something true, because what the Randians are saying is that person did more than was appropriate. But appropriate, picks out a different option in the conversation of the Randians from the option it picked out in the conversation of the Christians or utilitarians or Kantians, who, Kant had a strong principle of charity too. He wasn't all that. So this is a long-winded way of saying, yeah, there's a way that we can accommodate talking about good, about right and wrong, about duty and obligation, without insisting that it's a sort of fundamental part of our moral theory. It might be sort of a useful tool for, promoting the good. And to different ways of using these terms can be evaluated in different contexts. And so one of the things we can do, we as, sort of ethicists who are also presumably concerned with, getting people to behave better, one of the things we can do is try to sort of up the stakes in the linguistic context in which we talk. And so make people aware. I mean, here's one easy way you can do that. Make people aware of how easy it is to make a positive difference without sacrificing too much. So I'm a vegan. I think that there are strong reasons not to eat animals, because I think there are strong reasons not to treat animals the way that they get treated in agriculture. And there are strong self-interested reasons why plant-based diets are healthier and all kinds of stuff like that. But when you think about it, everyone has to decide what to eat, on a daily basis. They have to decide what to eat. You've got to eat something. Well, unless you're in a food desert, and of course some people are. So I'm mostly talking to people who live in the United States, where even in fairly poor parts of the United States, increasingly there is easy access to plant-based foods. Well, just plants, for example. Encouraging people to eat like plant-based foods rather than animal-based foods, that's one easy way that you can make a difference. And so just raising that as a possibility, so bringing it into the linguistic context. So when you think about your choices, well, here's one of the choices you could have made, and here's how easy it would be to make that. It's more likely that you will then see making a worse choice in terms of like ordering the veal or the pate de foie gras as sort of beyond the pale, as, you know, not even living up to a standard of minimal decency. And that's a way that we can actually, you know, in a sense, we're affecting a linguistic context in order to bring about a change of behavior.
Well, I still want to say this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. We've managed to cover an enormous amount of ground in some wonderful detail. And we look forward to having you on again to regale us with more of the virtues of utilitarianism.